There we go. Right. So I make it 8 o'clock, which is start time. So hello to everyone. Welcome to this evening's conversation with the author of Things I Learned from Falling, Claire Nelson. I'm Tim Fryer. I'm the founder and curator of Adventurous Inc. So we're going to spend the next hour in conversation with Claire. So I've been doing this for a while now. So you probably know that I gave up the day job about a year ago, but I've been running Adventurous Inc. since 2017, and in that time I've sent people a lot of books. I've never seen a response like this, honestly. I think Claire was a little blown away by it as well, but the amount of people who just picked this thing up and not put it down again. This is the hardback version, by the way. That's why it looks a bit different to it. It looks a bit different to yours. Who've picked this thing up and just not put it down because, oh my words! I mean, the must-read true story of 2020. It's also been the must-read true story of 2021. So it's an absolutely fabulous book. So it's an honour to speak to Claire and understand a bit more about it. So I've got a basic structure. So we're gonna, like we do with all our authors, we're gonna get to know them a little bit. We're gonna understand kind of how they came to write the book that we're talking about, and then we will talk about the book and we'll talk a bit about writing as well. And then with this one, we're going to talk a bit about what happened afterwards as well, because I think I certainly found it a really powerful book, quite an affecting book in many regards, and I'm sure lots of people did as well. So we'll talk about that as well. So awful lot to get through in an hour, but I have a feeling that you guys have got an awful lot of questions as well. So what I'm going to say is, if you want to, you can ask questions as we go along. Please feel free to do that. If you've got a burning question that you want to ask, please pop it in the chat now. And what I'll try and do is I'll slot them in to the conversation when we get to the appropriate point. I try and act as a bit of a ringmaster just to hold it all together and make sense of it. But really, we can go wherever you want to go. So if you've got a question that you want to ask, pop it in the chat. And if you want to ask it in person, so you can pop up on screen and have a chat there, then that's you're more than welcome to do. Or I can ask it on your behalf. It's absolutely fine. So the chat is the place to do that. If you want to chip in as we go through, you're welcome to raise your hand, as in find the raise your hand button. Don't wave at me, because really, I'm afraid I'm only looking at Claire, as we all are. Right, where's she gone? Let's find Claire.
Here I am.
I can hear you. There we are. There we are. There's Claire. Too many people tonight. Too many people. Hello, Claire.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. And I mean, I'm blown away by you and your subscribers. My gosh, what an incredible bunch of people. You've already made me cry this week, and I'm not a crier, so I don't like to make a habit of that.
Oh dear. Well, I am. I have to be honest. And I think one of the first. I always read books. I hate to say it because we'll talk a bit about devices and digital devices. I always read a book and I have my phone with me because I make an awful lot of notes in Evernote. And so if we look, I don't know if you can see that. If you see what's the first thing it says in Evernote about reading this? Learn from falling. I cried. That is the first thing I said. So told you, it's quite a powerful and affecting book. And yeah, my first note was I cried. It made me so.
Oh, I mean, that's amazing.
How could we? I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased you're happy with the response, Claire. Thank you very much. That's really kind. See, Sean was crying too. That's really kind. This is what we do. We love reading books, but they're not all stories. I mean, Losing Eden that we did the other month. It's it's not a story. It's talking about our connection with the natural world. So we don't just do stories, but when we do a story, I like to pick a good one. And blimey, it's a good one. Because most people picked it up and read it in one go, I'm sure most people have read it. We can't really do too many spoilers if they haven't, though, because you're here, aren't you?
Yeah.
Which is a wonderful thing.
Already given it away, so.
And we're all very grateful that you are. So let's get to know Claire a little bit. So there's a twang there, isn't there? You weren't born and brought up in London. Where do you hail from, Claire?
From New Zealand. I moved to the UK in 2005. I've lost all sense of what year it is, so roughly however many years ago that was, 16. And so yeah, the UK has been my home since then. So I have no concept of what my accent's like anymore.
It's lovely and lilting, but there is a hint of New Zealand. So is that, what was it like growing up in New Zealand? Is that where you got your love of the outdoors, or would you move before you got there? Because it is an outdoorsy sort of culture, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a strange one, because I grew up in New Zealand where I wouldn't have said I grew up in an outdoorsy family, as I wouldn't have said like being in the outdoors and doing outdoor activities was like a hobby or a thing. It was just the way that you did things. So I didn't really think of it as a thing. It's, spending time outside. It wasn't a thing. That's just how you lived. My mum would be like, get out of the house, come back at dinner time, and you'd just be on the beach, or you'd be up in the bush tracks and making forts. And, it's just sort of the norm. I did camping with school and things like that. But weirdly, it wasn't until I moved to the UK that I really started to embrace spending time in the outdoors as like an activity. And started walking some of the national trails and, and camping. And that suddenly it was just like, oh yeah, I need more of this. And I think too, when you're living in a city like London, it has everything that I'd come here for, which had, all the things that New Zealand did, the culture and the excitement and the buzz. But then it's like, oh, but now I also need to go out and spend my weekend in a tent. So, I think that was moving here was actually what made me kind of realize that that's something that I need in my life.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's that old adage about you don't know what you've got until it's gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know, New Zealand is surprising. My favorite reason for people cancelling a subscription, and it's surprisingly common, is moving to the other side of the world. Now, I don't think they're doing it to get away from all the books I keep sending them, but there's certainly a pull, particularly to New Zealand, and unfortunately we don't ship all the way around there. So I definitely get a sense of a really strong outdoor community over there in a way that you don't quite get over here. But I think, I do think we've got, for all my joking about camping for all with Jack Cox, I do think we've got quite a special outdoor culture here, and that's a good thing. So how did you get into the writing side of things then? Did you always like words? Were you an English geek at school? How did you get into that side of it?
Yeah, I was always the English drama art geek. I'm awful at maths. I'm not that person. I wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid, and I was writing books like stories, and as soon as I'd learned to write words, so it was kind of just always the thing. And when I was in New Zealand, I was writing reviews for a music magazine because my friends were sort of in that industry. And but when I moved to London, it was kind of, I want to move to London and be a writer, but I was actually a travel agent at the time. I wanted to be a travel writer, but I had qualified as a travel agent, thinking that would be a really good inroad without having to go and do all the sort of qualification stuff, which was, first of all, not correct. Second of all, I think set me up for a lifetime of imposter syndrome. But I took a very roundabout route into working in the publishing industry. I did an internship. I was in my late 20s, so I was older than a lot of people doing those internships, but sort of, I was very determined and got there, and just kind of learning as I went, which like I think I say in the book, but learning the hard way has always been the way that I seem determined to do things. I don't know how to learn any other way. Just do it, wing it, figure it out, and learn as you go.
Absolutely. No, I'm a big advocate for that. That's why it took 5 full years for me to go full time in the business, because I was just trying it out. I needed to make a whole series of mistakes.
Absolutely.
And that's what you do. So I kind of go. So why did you want to be a writer then? What was the pull into it?
Well, I didn't really figure out why until into my 30s. That really it was the way that I felt safest at expressing myself. And and then there's all that very sort of textbook stuff of you go back to childhood, and I was living in an environment where there was so much tension, and there was just so much no one talked about anything, no one talked about feelings or worries or fears. And of course we're living in an environment where we had problems with an older sibling, and that was never talked about. And so I was always kind of in my own little bubble, wasn't able to express how I was feeling and what was going on in my head. And I was writing a journal. So I had a journal from the age of 7. And, and I mean, I don't write in it daily, but I've had one throughout my life into the present day. And so it's kind of that really just became an outlet where I felt like I could say things, and I felt seen and heard, and in a way that I speaking, even today, speaking still feels like I'm going to get the words going to come out wrong, and, people are going to misunderstand me. But writing, I feel safe there. So I think that's now understandable.
You're sort of in control, aren't you?
Yeah.
Nothing can happen without you shaping it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so powerful. Come on, then. You must. Can you remember any of your earliest stories? What was the earliest thing you wrote about?
Oof. Okay. Well, shameful admission that I was very much a little tiny cat lady as a child. I was obsessed with all things cats, and most of my stories revolved around cats. My teacher once said to my mum, "Can she write about anything other than cats?" So I wrote a story about pirates, but then they found a cat in the story. It was a little bit, it wasn't very broad ranging. So I think my first full story was Bingo the Mischievous Kitten. He averts some burglars or something. There was some real drama going on there. Not a bestseller, I don't think.
Oh, I love it though. Bingo the Mischievous Kitten. How cool is that? But this one was your first actual book, is that right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow, you smashed it out of the park on that first one, didn't you?
Oh.
So there you are. You were interning in was that in London? You moved straight to London?
Yeah.
And that was your intro to the world of travel writing, was it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, travel writing, it was kind of the industries I was working in was more like lifestyle, and I ended up working for for a food magazine. It's no secret it was for Jamie Oliver's food magazine when he used to have one, and there were always travel elements to these things which I would seek out. But it was also a way of sort of challenging myself to write about things I might not normally have written about. And I think one of the first internships I did was for a magazine called Ethical Living. So, really kind of a departure from what I wanted to be writing, but it's all part of the process.
And I guess that's you've got to, for all those journals you've written for yourself, you've still got to learn that craft, haven't you? In the full glare of people having to read the stuff and actually enjoy it and get it past the editor and all that.
Yeah, that's the terrifying bit, that people are going to read what you write.
That's funny. So you sort of skate over this period in the book with I think very brief reference to in memory, eating sea urchins in the middle of the Icelandic Sea, strolling through Central Park, and I forget the other references, but I mean, you must have had some incredible experiences in that role. What were the couple of the high points, or maybe even take us to the middle of the Icelandic Sea and tell us about eating sea urchins?
Well, the Icelandic trip was incredible. That was it still remains one of my favorite destinations, and that was for Jamie Oliver's magazine, and the art director, who's also a Kiwi, she was also a budding photographer. So we were really keen to go together and go to Iceland. So we pretty much spent a year like sweet talking our editor to let us go and do it. And it was incredible. We got to Iceland, and unfortunately news had spread around Iceland that Jamie Oliver was coming. So it was in the paper and everyone was expecting it. And of course we show up, these two Kiwis in like our hiking boots, and like, we felt like everywhere we go, I had to apologize. So sorry, it's just us, you know. And but people were so lovely, and we, you know, everyone was kind of in everywhere we went. People were like, they'd heard about us and they wanted to sort of show us what they were doing. And I mean, the number of stories that you could find just talking to people there was incredible. And we were invited to go to a local event. There's an event called, and I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, but I think it's Poromor or something like that, where every February they sort of get together and they eat all the foods that were sort of traditionally eaten back in the day in Iceland. So a lot of like dead, rotted, cured things. And so we were invited to this, and they described it to us, the PR described it as a Viking festival. And we said, do we need to dress up or anything? And they're like, no, they'll just go as you are. So we had been on the ship in the morning eating sea urchins. Well, I had been eating sea urchins. And then we'd gone to a farm. So we'd been around a lot of sheep. So then even after we'd showered and washed and gone to this event, we only had like one set of really warm clothes and we stank. Nothing we could do about it, but we show up at this festival and it's black tie. And so there's us, you know, in this, you know, event with all these wonderful, friendly people and we were the guests of honor, which we also didn't realize. So we showed up in our stinky sheep jumpers and you know, so it was just such those sorts of experiences you just cannot ever, you know, I never took those for granted, because it was just like stepping into a world, you know, that's why we travel, isn't it? Is just to have those experiences and meet other people, and you remember, and you sort of remember the things that go a bit awry or they're a bit like cringy at the time. And you have to just laugh. And
absolutely, and yeah. that's a cracking story, it has to be said. How cool. So do you think you've got a sort of, is there a way that you try and write things? Are you thinking about the reader? Are you trying to, how do you do that, translating that experience that you had in that first person to something that other people can kind of get their heads around?
Really good question. And I'd have to admit, I don't know how much I think about how I'm writing, but I know when I write, I want people to be able to see what I'm, you know, smell what I'm smelling, feel what I'm feeling as best I can. And, you know, and kind of just, I want them to be there with me. And I don't think about how I'm doing that, but it's just sort of painting little pictures. I know I do use a lot of you know, analogies and ways of trying to describe things so that people can picture it in their head, even if they can't see exactly what I can see, you know. And so it's been interesting to sort of write something like this and see how people respond to it. And, you know, people have said that they felt like they were there, which is just, that's what you want. But I don't know if I have a technique that I understand how I'm doing that. Does that make sense?
You're clearly just a natural. You do like a simile or an analogy. The one that made me laugh was two Labradors in a raincoat. Now, what's going on there? Where did that? I mean, that must have been a thing that you'd seen, right?
I'm sure it's probably like a New Yorker cartoon or something somewhere, you know. But there's always the thing of like two animals that's in a trench coat, or two children in a trench coat trying to be a grown up, and that's and there's always the joke in my workplace that there's a photo of me where there's a photo of me where I resemble a golden retriever, and so it was kind of this whole thing about sort of trying to think what creature I would be if I was in a trench coat. So.
I loved it. And it's funny, you know, when I am making notes on my phone and thinking, what are we going to talk about? There was one thing I was like, I've got to ask about the two Labradors in a trench coat. So there we go. That's good. So now you touched on this earlier, and this might be it, but clearly, as you started to reflect on kind of where you'd got to in your life and in everything you're doing, and you were obviously living a great life, but there was obviously something that you weren't happy with. How did how did that start to work its way through? How did it make you feel? What were the signs that something wasn't quite right?
Yeah, I mean, it must have been about 2013. So like, I think I was like very early 30s, and I had, you know, I'd reached this point, this sort of pinnacle where life was now everything I'd hoped it would be. And yet I was like, why does this feel like I'm out here on this limb by myself? And I started to notice that I was feeling anxious all the time. And I think it was by 2014, I really began to notice that my mental health wasn't quite in a good way. I was very tightly wound, you know, and just, but it was so gradual that it was kind of easy to just keep pushing it away and pushing it away. And it wasn't until the pain started to show up in my body a lot, and this problem with my wrist, by like 2016, it was 2017, and like I can't, you know, I can't keep ignoring this. And so yeah, I was going to see a therapist, I think, from 2014 onwards, and just being like, I don't understand what's going on. Everything's great. Why do I feel like this? And really, but then also doing that thing of, okay, well, I'm just going to go away by myself and figure this out. And then talk to my therapist and then go away by myself and figure it out. And kind of not clicking that maybe that was part of the problem.
Yeah, it's strange and difficult, isn't it? I mean, because to some degree, I think that was one of the reasons why I really engaged with the book, and I suspect it's what a lot of people kind of felt emotionally, is that it does touch on those things. I mean, you talked about it later on. You talked about the constant fear of fucking up at work. Excuse my language. It's Claire's language. I never said it. I'm not a potty mouth.
I am a bit sweary, so
it was all the Kiwi. She had the rude words. She also talked about pissing around on the internet later. I'm just pleased that my mother doesn't read any of this or tune in for this. But to be so, I mean, you know, you talked about that, and you could feel that it was a concern, and I think lots of us felt like, you know, I felt that in the end. One of the big drivers for me leaving my day job wasn't that this was working fantastically well, which, I mean, it was going quite well, but it was that I suffered from anxiety, and I was like, you know, I've been on this planet for 40 odd years, and I have never felt like this. What on earth is going on? And I never expected to do it. And for me, getting outdoors was my salvation. And that was, you were clearly pulled to that, weren't you? You clearly, at some intrinsic level, from being that little girl running around at the beach and the bush and all that, you kind of had that instinctive knowledge that was where you needed to go to find your salvation, didn't you?
Yeah. And I think, you know, when things don't feel right and you know they're not right, and then you start to pay attention to when things do feel right, and you're thinking, okay, maybe this is, you know, I should be paying attention to this. So it would be when I'd go on a camping trip with my friends, or if I'd go out on a hike somewhere. There'd be some days, like there was one point at the end of 2016, I think, where I had some days to take off at work. And so I decided to go up to the Scottish borders, and I just bought whatever I had on my credit card and just put it down, and I stayed in this converted shepherd's hut in the middle of this woodland on someone's property, and I'd stayed there for 3 days. I just needed to get away. I didn't like no phone, there was no electricity. And the fact that I had actually really needed to do that was already like, okay, well, these are the things that I really need to be paying attention to. Is why do I keep being drawn to doing more of this? And why do I keep just thinking that that's a short fix and that'll make everything else balance itself out?
Yeah, I love that. That idea of when things don't feel right, that you should pay attention to the things that do feel right. Wow, that's really powerful. And then you started doing more of that. So how did you find yourselves over in California and kind of, you know, literally worlds away? That's it's quite a leap, isn't it? From going to even going to the Highlands is quite a leap, but kind of opposite side of the world, it's a big step, isn't it?
It's a big step. I didn't find it too daunting. I don't know. I think just like I moved to London and didn't know anyone and just sort of rocked up, and I feel like it was no harder than doing that. But it was just that I kept getting these images at night. You know, I knew that I had to change something. I didn't know what it was. I felt like the universe was giving me all these signs, and then I would just lie in bed at night and I couldn't sleep. My anxiety was terrible. I had this pain in my hand, and the visions that were coming into my head were just the same. It was like mountains. I can still see it in my head, like snowy mountain peaks, pine trees, like, you know, roads, driving. I still didn't drive at that point, still didn't have a license, never learned. And so it was just like, I need that. I need to be right there. And I don't know how to make it happen. But in my mind, I'm like, well, in my head, that's how I imagine Canada. And so if I can get a visa for Canada, and if I can get a driver's license, and then we'll see what happens. And then the only obstacle was work, because I still liked my job. And then the magazine closed down. I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to Canada.
So sometimes the universe just gives you that nudge that you need.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. So you literally you almost saw solace or salvation in your head as a vision of snow-capped mountain peaks.
Yeah, that's it. I like that, the idea of that salvation, and it's a vision of salvation. That's what it was.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing. So yeah, so how did it feel when you were? It must have been liberating once you'd gone. Actually, well, that's it. I can go. I'm on the other side of the world. That's great.
There was the initial moment when I got there where I was like, okay, I'm here. Then it was like a couple of weeks of sheer panic and anxiety, and being like, okay. So now I have to make this work. Like, what if this doesn't work? But just get on with it. I started throwing myself into pitching articles, something I kind of always, you know, was overthinking and didn't do enough of, and self-doubt and all of that. So I was like, I'm just going to do that for a week and just throw ideas out there. The first one I pitched out came back. They said, yeah, we want to commission you. We're going to send you to Quebec. I had to drive on a motorway. I'd only driven in a car on my own once since getting my license. I was on a motorway in the snow in Quebec and driving to do the story. And I just kind of like, I was being forced very quickly to just do the things, get out of my comfort zone, and not sit there in my little safe zone and overthink it. There was no space for that. I had to go and do it. And so I think the more I was doing that, I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? The more you do that, the more you go, oh, okay, I feel better about this, and it's no longer scary. And in fact, yeah, that's when the liberation started to come in, and I was like driving through those snowy mountains, and that was like, I remember having a day, it was, as I described in the book, where I found the last place in Quebec that was still doing dog sledding that season. Got a cheap rate there, just went up there, dog sledded in the afternoon, went up and did a hike in the snow by myself, and stood on the top of this peak, and it was like, all right, okay, I think I made a good decision here. Now I just need to figure out how to incorporate all this into my day-to-day life. And then that was the day that I got the invitation to go to California.
Wow. So you were clearly on your way. I think so. You know, it's that there's the idea of sort of sometimes you need to leap, and then you will find a net, and that's clearly what happened for you. And I think it's so powerful for people to hear those stories, because as we both know, as everyone knows, it's hard making that leap, and the more people who say, look, I've stepped off, and that's a terrible analogy, isn't it? I've stepped off and I was okay. Let's rewind that a bit, shall we? Anyway, you did it, and it was great. You got to California. I should say, thanks, James. Thoroughly unintentional.
So the trick is to leap and not to slip. That's the key, right?
We're out to California now. So if anyone's got any questions, do feel free to chip in. This isn't my show. This is yours. So I'm sure you had lots of queries from reading Claire's book, lots of things that it made you feel, lots of questions that it provoked in your mind. So please feel free to chip in. That's what it's all about. So you were out there with your mates, and then they disappeared off. They left you with their. I mean, that's great friends, that is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are they like that with everyone? Do they just trust everyone? Or are you clearly a trustworthy soul?
They're pretty freewheeling and free and easy folks. So yeah.
And you talk about being alone, and clearly you like that experience of being alone, and so in many regards, them disappearing off and kind of leaving you to the place, that probably suited you to
oh yeah, I was in my element very much. I've accepted the fact I'm a fairly solitary creature, and but also I think at that time I was very much, felt safest by myself, but there were issues, there were reasons for that are not necessarily good either as well. So I was sort of trying to figure those out while I was out there. And so the fact that they introduced me to some of their friends, I remember there's all the alarm bells going off, going, I don't want to meet people, I want to be here by myself, I don't want to do that. Then at the same time going, this is why you left London, you have to get out of that comfort zone. And and I'm still good friends with those people now. So it's kind of, again, like trying to really test the boundaries of what solitude means to me, what's healthy, and what's the right balance. But yeah, no, I was very happy to be there by myself.
Are you an only child?
No, I'm a middle child.
So is that why you like the solitude? Because you could just get away from people, do you?
Yeah, I think it's just, again, growing up, it was like I always felt safest when I was just in my little room doing my thing, and then I've just done. I think that I've just felt like I've managed to thrive the most when I've been on my own, and yeah. But then there's all these other elements too of like not needing other people, and just not having to compromise, and not needing to make a fuss, and all of these things, that there are good elements and there are bad elements to it as well, to put it in the most basic way.
As you described in the book, you were so desperate not to take help from anyone that you were quite happy to effectively stitch yourself up when you were bloodied and bleeding, when you were staying with your friend.
Yeah, that was the wake-up call. That was the moment I was like, oh, okay, yeah, no, this is too much in that direction. Like I really need to figure out what I'm doing wrong here.
But still, the idea of, and so the reason I asked if you're an only child, I'm an only child. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, and I spent a lot of time on my own as a kid, and I love it. I still love it now.
Yeah.
I spend quite a bit of time on my own out there. I seem to have been encumbered by a dog now. I don't know how that, well, lockdown.
Well, they don't count. I feel like a dog's okay.
Yeah. They don't answer back, do they? So you've got that. You've kind of got that sense of freedom, and it's continuing that journey of self-discovery. That's it. I've got the freedom. You were like, right, the hike out to the oasis. That's what I'm going to do. And off you set, and then there was that moment when you stopped and you went back and you got the stick. Now that's wow.
Yeah, you got the stick.
What? There's a danger. This is the third time when I talk about the universe intervening in the space of 34 minutes. But what do you think? What do you think was going on there? That's weird, isn't it?
I have no idea. I'll never understand that, other than the fact that the universe up until that point, and I'm not religious, but I'm mildly spiritual in the way of, I just feel like there's a connection to the earth and nature and all that stuff we talk about, and very much in a rough and ready way. But I was getting all these signals of sending me to Canada and ending up in California, and so I don't know, but so I just take that as another one of those things that something was looking out for me and sending me in the right direction. Because I don't know, because I'm so not thinking about taking a stick. I just not even on my radar. And it was only when I was pulling out, I just had that really strong feeling like you just go back and get it. And I honestly think that saved my life.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And we'll come. I guess we'll come back to the we'll come back to the saving your life thing. So that's it. So you've set off, and you got to the trailhead, and there's another couple there, and it's like, oh, I've come out here all the way, and there's another couple there. How dare they?
Yeah, absolutely. That, like, oh, should have got here earlier, because now there's other people on the trail, and you go out into the desert because you want to have that time and that space without interruption. And so even just seeing the color of someone else's jacket further up the trail, it just takes something away from for me, takes something away from being immersed in this space and this moment. And it's pretty selfish, definitely.
It might be pretty selfish. I can see a few folk nodding in the audience there. Yes, I am cheekily keeping an eye on you folk there. Don't forget to ask. Thank you, James. Thank you, Peter. Peter, we don't talk about next books. We never talk about next books. Who was it who snuck one in? Neil Ansell snuck one in at the end of our conversation. Because if we talk about next books, then you either think, oh, it's going to be in Adventurers Inc., or you think, oh, I've got to rush out and buy it, and then I feature it, and then so we don't do next books. So Claire, we're not going to ask you about what your next book's going to be. Thanks, James. Thanks, Rebecca. We'll come back to that. Oh no, this book. Right. What? Oh right, I'm with you. Sorry, Peter. Yeah, good question. So Peter was asking, was there going to be a book anyway? Were you going to talk about the story pre-USA? Was this a story you planned to tell in the book?
I mean, without the desert portion, before the accent?
Yeah. Very
good question, because when I left for Canada, I've always wanted to write a book. That's just, when you write, that's sort of the thing that you wanted to do. And I remember when I left for Canada thinking, well, I really want to write about the experiences that I'd been feeling of, loneliness and all, and mental health and all the stuff that I'd been struggling with. And I actually thought maybe I could work it into fiction, even though it's not something I'd ever done before. And I thought maybe when I'm on the road in Canada, it could be like a traveling, because my original plan was to maybe just drive across Canada, the entire length of it, the width of it. And I thought maybe there'd be like a story there, maybe, because the thing is, I love to travel, and then the stories kind of reveal themselves. And I thought maybe that's something that could weave in. Maybe I'll answer some of these questions I have while on the road, which is, of course, what happened, but just never in the way I could have anticipated. So, I mean, maybe, but it would have also been something that, in my mind, would have taken a few years to come together. And even then, maybe I would have talked myself out of it if I didn't get those questions answered in the way that I did now.
Great question, Peter. Thank you. So, can you actually remember the fall? Like the first bit of it? Obviously, kind of you got a lot of the later bit. Can you remember what happened?
The very moment of yeah. It's one of the most vivid memories, because it. I mean, that I remember what it felt like to put my foot into that little foothold. I remember what the foothold looked like. It was just a little bit in the rock, little indent, and I was pushing my heel into it. And I remember the feeling when my boots started to slide away. And then, and it's that thing that people say all the time in these situations, that it was like it went into slow motion. And it really does, because these few seconds were just, they're longer than seconds, and you can feel yourself, like I'm grabbing, got the stick in one hand. So stick in this hand, and stick in this hand, I think, and I was grabbing at the rock, and I'm stabbing at the rock, and I'm just sliding, left side of my body leaning into it, which is why that left side of my body took the impact. And just that moment, that split second when I can see I'm sliding, and it's not a long way, it's not a long distance I'm sliding, about 10 feet, I was told later. I wasn't out there with a measuring stick, but that I'm sliding, and I know I'm going to fall off the edge. I don't know where I'm going to land. I don't know what I'm going to land on. And so it's just literally brain just going, all right, get ready, because you're about to get really hurt. And then suddenly it's just like, boom, hit the ground. I remember the crack. I remember that sound. That's why I open with that in the book, because it's just that sound was etched in my memory. And of course I heard my bones break before I felt anything. And then, there's an initial roar of pain that goes through you. And then it's like, oh, I've got to get up. And like, I just thought I'd maybe broken my ankle or something. So I, that's when try and move, and suddenly I'm like, I can't. And, and I remember so quickly realizing that it was my pelvis that I'd broken. And I remember when the story came out in New Zealand, when I was recovering, and it was in the news, and there'd be comments from people being like, how did she know her pelvis was broken? She's not a doctor, like really suspicious about it. I'm like, when it happens to you, people love to be very like, oh, that seems fishy to me. I'm like, no, mate. When you break something, you pretty much know what's going on there.
Isn't that bizarre though, that you're putting yourself out? Well, I suppose you were putting yourself out there at that time. That was probably pre the story, but there was this natural suspicion. Well, how did she know? And it's very, yeah.
There's loads of it, and it's just very funny to me. Very funny.
Yeah. I guess that's the way you've got to deal with it. So did you know straight away you were in trouble? How long did it take to sink in?
I knew. It was kind of like it hit me in stages. It's like, oh, I've hurt myself. Oh, I can't get up. This is bad. Call 911. I have no phone signal. That was the first like real like, oh, this is. I'm like, because you just think you injure yourself, you call for help. So it was only once I realized I had no signal, and I really, it hit home that I really had no signal out here. That was like, this is bad. Okay, what are my options? And then okay, I need someone else to come by on the trail. And then I look at my GPS, and so then I zoom in. I'm like, I'm not on the trail. And then I'm like, this is even more serious. It's just on it. These realizations were just like body slamming me one at a time. And suddenly it's like, I don't know how anyone's going to know I'm here. And then immediately my brain's going, well, then you're going to die out here, because that happens to people all the time. I mean, anyone who spends time in the outdoors, you read stories, if you hear of people. And then certainly I'd already been hearing stories of people who die in the national park. Loads of people die out in national parks. And I was like, well, that's going to be me. I'm going to be one of those people. So it all happened. That happened pretty quickly. I would definitely within the first hour, if not first half an hour.
Wow. And so, do you think you started processing the implications of that straight away? Because you did a lot of processing at first with your phone and your camera and talking it through.
I mean, as soon as that realization hit, as I say, I was like, you're going to die out here. Then it's like, okay. Then my brain's kind of, it's like your brain doesn't want to process it, and at the same time it wants to process it. And so it's kind of like I can describe it like as a wrestle in your brain, and then that was the moment I'm like, okay, well, I've got to be pragmatic about it, because it's sort of how I approach things. And so it's like, well, then if I do die out here, then who's going to know what happened? I mean, to be fair, it'd be pretty obvious what had happened, but still, I was like, I need to let people know, need to leave a message, need to record a video. So and also I think it was my brain doing its usual thing of, I need to distract myself from something that I don't want to think about by turning to my digital devices.
That's where I was going. It's strange, isn't it? The relationship that we have with these devices, that clearly when you were sat there and you came to that conclusion that really, how much time have I spent pushing this bit of glass around, pissing my life away on the internet, and yet still it's such a useful piece of technology, and it's an engageable piece of technology, because we can see people. We can't see, well, you can see people through there, but you can almost sense the people on the other side of it, can't you? It's a really weird tension.
Yeah, I mean, I always imagine, like, when I open up any of my devices, it's like, like all this noise, and like the whole world's in there. So it's like very tempting to, close it. But it is designed to pull us in. It is designed to hold our attention. That's entirely what it is designed to do. And it can be two things at once. It can be both really wonderful, entertaining, and invaluable tool, and it can also be really damaging and a real time suck. And it just comes down to how we're using it. But it's hard because we're battling against something that has been designed to grab as much of our time and attention as possible. And our brains are really still, I think, trying to figure out how this affects us long term, you know.
Oh, Claire, our brains are still trying to work out how we work a 9 to 5 in a factory. I mean, you know, we are nowhere near catching up with
right.
Yeah, we're just not built for this. For this. That's fine. No. But it's so strange, isn't it? But you're absolutely right. You know, and I think we all know that on loads of different levels, and I suspect that's probably why lots of people aren't reading books, because we know that it distracts us and it takes us away and it takes us into a different world, but it's one that we can genuinely immerse ourselves in without constantly thinking, oh, I meant to say so-and-so to someone else, and then a little alert coming up for something else, and you're distracted, and then you go and look at cats on the internet, and you know, but it's all designed to pull us away from where we should be putting our attention.
Yeah.
But clearly, in that instance, you were using it in a really powerful way. Laurie asked, how long after being rescued did you watch the video diary that you'd been made, and what was that like?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I think I have never enjoyed watching it. I mean, it's a weird watch for me, but I remember when my mum came to the hospital, and it was before I was going to be medevaced to Canada. They weren't quite sure when. It was a lot of wrestling with the insurers and things. And then my mum was going to go back to New Zealand and kind of sort of sort out work stuff and then see if she could come back and when I came out of the rehab facility. So that was the plan. So before she went back to New Zealand, I told her about the videos. And so we watched a couple, or I let her watch a couple, and I sort of looked over the shoulder. But, you know, I didn't sit down and watch them all the way through. I think it was, you know, a couple of months after I left hospital, and it was when I was with my mum, and we watched them all together, and she was laughing and crying at the same time because there was some bits where I was going a bit mad, and she's like, you're ridiculous and amazing. It was, but it's a hard watch, and I've never planned for them to be shared, but there was a New Zealand current affairs program that I was doing a story with, and when they found out there were videos, they're begging me to share a couple, and I thought, well, I'll share a couple of small snippets just so people can see what it was like out there. And then of course that got picked up by an Australian TV channel, and anyway, so they ended up on YouTube, so people are aware of them now, and so they get shared around, and it's like, okay, so they're out there, and I think it's nice in a way for people to sort of see what it was like in those moments, but it's very weird for me to watch them. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. And again, we're back to that strange way that digital technology works, and you don't really control it, do you? You can't shut it off after the sort of genie's out of the bottle. So I can, yeah, it's a strange one. So there you are. And you've got to come to terms with everything, and you did, and I think that's the powerful heart of the book, really, because I think it makes, even I'm struggling. So I don't know how you do this. I don't know. You must have done this so many times. Maybe it's practice. Hats off to you, first of all, for writing about it, and now for being brave enough to come out and talk about it. So thank you so much. How do you do that? How do you come to, because you found peace, you know, you talked about acceptance and peace, and that's, I don't know if I could find that. How did you find that?
Yeah, it only really hit me about a year ago, that when I looked back, it was like I was actually going through those 5 stages of grief, and I could see it really clearly all of a sudden, like, wow, I really did, because I started out being really angry, and then I was in denial, and, you know, angry at myself, then in denial about the fact that, oh no, I'm not going to die here, I'm being stubborn, and then, you know, moving on to depression, and the 3rd day I actually allowed myself to cry. So I'm really moving through those stages, and so you do come to acceptance, and And it just reached a point when, for whatever reason, when you get to that point, I don't know how I got there, it just seems like that's the thing that happens. And it was a really nice feeling. It was like, for someone who loves being in the outdoors, and I had fallen in love with the desert so much, and to be out there and just, like creatures, I love wild creatures. I mean, anyone who follows my Instagram sees that I'm constantly perving at birds and foxes and things. And I was seeing bats and hummingbirds and things that were just no longer afraid of me because I'd been out there for a little while. And it was like, oh, I'm a part of the desert now. And it was just like, that was such a beautiful feeling. Like I still get chills when I think of that, because it was the most peaceful I think I've ever felt, and might be the most peaceful I've ever going to feel in my life until I reach the end.
Wow. Sorry, I'm a terrible interviewer. I get too wrapped up in it. What a wonderful thing.
I'm grateful to have had that experience. And I was speaking to someone out in Joshua Tree, who's a radio show out there, and he, he loves and knows the desert more than many people. And he says he described a scene from Desert Solitaire, a classic book, Edward Abbey, I think, where they talk about someone who they'd found out in the desert who had died out there, and he was leaning, just propped up, sitting against a tree, looking out at the view when they found him. And it was as if he had just found peace in that final moment. And I cried after I heard that story, because that is the most wonderful place to be in your final moments, And I'm so grateful that I felt that, and then was still able to walk away from that and still be here. I mean, what a gift.
Absolutely. So James asked a question, and he wondered if your attitude to risk had changed as a result of the experience. Yeah,
I mean, it kind of had to. I've always been pretty gung-ho about stuff, and now I'm not allowed to. My brain wants me to be gung-ho. Like, I still want to go off and hike and not sort of worry about telling people where I'm going, but of course I do it also because everyone who knows me, they won't let me get away with not doing it now, but of course, like I have to really be less careless, obviously, and less complacent, and just and I mean, things like going into the outdoors, it's like I'm definitely more risk aware and very keen to tell the story so that other people can be more risk aware, because it's so easy to fall into that trap of it won't happen to me. And even when you get, and I've just been so aware of the fact that when you're comfortable doing something, you stop sensing danger, and that sense of danger is what keeps us safe a lot of the time. It can go too far in the other direction. But I was realizing that, like, all the fear in my life, I had fear in all the wrong places. So I was really afraid of things like, messing up at work and doing things wrong, but then I wasn't afraid about just like schlepping off into the middle of the desert by myself and driving in a snowy motorway in a blizzard in Montreal, and I'd only driven a car by myself once, like things like that. It was just no radar going off. And so I'm like, is it something that's wrong with me that I don't do that? So, I mean, even it may still not come naturally to me. I'm like, you were given an opportunity to learn now, Claire Nelson, you need to manually put that in place and really think about it. It's not that I'm going to start living, wrapped up in cotton wool and stop doing things that are perceived risky. I'm just going to be more prepared and sensible about it, and not be gung-ho.
Prepared and sensible. That sounds good. So having reached that point, what did it feel like when you heard that voice coming out of the helicopter?
That's the other moment I'll never ever forget. It's a euphoria like I don't think I'll ever feel again. It's just from going from having accepted that this was it to getting that little bit of hope of, oh, there's somebody looking, to actually realizing that I'm actually going to be okay. I went into shock at first, but it was this physical like relief and release, and like just I literally just let go. And I'm, you know, was waving this stick and I let it go, and it just fell. My arms just fell to my side, and it was like just felt completely free of everything. All the tension in my body was just washed out and gone, and just that relief is like nothing else. And the words, you know, are still burned in my brain, still burned there.
Yeah, well, what great words. So after a, you know, it's almost glib to call it a life-changing experience, because it's so much more than that. Do you have a phrase for what you call it?
No, I mean, I describe it as a near-death experience, but it's a life-changing experience. And I mean, those things can come in any shape or size and form, right? So it's definitely a life-changing experience. Not glib at all, I don't think.
Yeah, maybe glib's the wrong word. It almost doesn't do it justice. I think that's almost what I'm thinking, because it was so magnificent. Anyway, so I mean, that must have changed your life in so many ways, beyond just not being gung-ho and being a bit more sensible. So what were the, obviously after you'd recovered, what were the immediate changes that you felt?
The immediate changes were, I mean, like within the first year, were to not be afraid of those things that were just not worth being afraid of. It was that real awareness that fear, and by fear I mean the fears that I was always dealing with, was such a waste of time. And in terms of connecting with people and not hiding myself anymore. You know, in fact, there's a lot of stuff that even my family and close friends still didn't know until they read the book. And so, you know, that just shows that there was so much I was just not revealing to anybody. One of my mates who, you know, we wouldn't really talk about that stuff, but he would message me after reading the book, and he'd like tell me, you know, we'd share things. And what was, but I spent a year after the recovery, and the point where the book ended, I then went back to Canada, because I was like, I'm now too old to renew that visa. I want to make the most of my Canadian visa. I spent a year in Canada, and I thought, I don't know anyone here, but I'll just spend this time again being by myself, processing what's gone on, trying to sort of get myself ready. So when I move back to my so-called normal life in London, I know the changes that I need to make. And it, of course, ended up then being the time that I spent writing the book. But then I moved back to London in February 2020, and, you know, not realize it. I thought I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to be more open, and I'm going to connect with people more, and put myself out there more, and like be more ambitious and all this stuff. But of course, we all know what happened. And so I found myself challenged with the set of lessons that I think were so invaluable to me in a pandemic situation, and wasn't expecting to have to be faced with, of course. I think the things that were challenged in that case, things like the use of the internet, like that was really put to the test, of like, oh, well, I'm trying to be off social media more, and you know, unprecedented circumstances, you know, I'm going to have to try and give myself a bit more leeway with that, and then falling down the rabbit hole again. And so, you know, there was a lot that was going on afterwards in terms of feeling old habits come back, feeling old fears come back, and then using the experiences that I had to be like, okay, these things are still here. I mean, I've always been very adamant of people knowing that I haven't come out of this, I didn't walk out of this experience completely transformed. You know, I think that would be really disingenuous to pretend that I had. That's sort of not how it works, but I just feel like I've come through with this massive, invaluable set of tools that I can now like deal with all of that stuff in a different way.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not, you know, for all, we use terms like life-changing experience, it doesn't flick any switches. We are still hardwired to be sucked into this thing. But I guess that's the point, is that you are hardwired to do it because the people who make this are very good at sucking you into it. But what you'd wired into yourself was a series of extra tools to deal with that, and to help remember what was important, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's perspective, but also things like when I feel all the anxieties and the self-doubt and everything come in, and I'm like, everything comes back to fear. You can really strip it all back. All these things of fear, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, loneliness, anxiety, it's all fear-based. And then I'm like, well, I've felt real fear. I know what real fear looks like. And these fears are not an immediate threat. They're not a real threat. They're something that I've made up. It's in my head. And that was the biggest realization, was being like, wow. And I let those things that I'd made up actually stop me living my life in the best way that I could. Like, how ridiculous is that? So it's sort of having that realization and that reminder, and obviously that perspective of what real, genuine fear is and a genuine threat is, it kind of just blows those away, and it just allows me to be like, okay, well, I might feel this way, but I'm not going to let that get in my way of my life anymore. I've been given another chance.
Wow, how powerful! So I can see we've just cleared 9 o'clock. We are going to run slightly over. Claire, is that okay with you? Can we do another 10 minutes?
Me?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I go all the time.
Well, we can't go on without you. I mean, they've
I get all the time, Tim. Don't you worry.
They don't want any more about that. They'd much rather hear from you. Trust me. So we will carry on, because we can't just stop because the hours have ticked past. So you're, I think in sharing the book, it's a way of helping other people sort of equip themselves with bits of the toolkit that you've got, without having to face that near-death, life-changing experience. Is that what you wanted? Did you set out to do that, or was it really just a cathartic, easy for me to say, process that you needed to work through?
No, it was. I think I would have always written it for catharsis anyway, no matter whether it would get published or not. But I wanted to write it, and then it was, to answer the question earlier, like I wanted to write about these sort of mental health challenges and the things I was struggling with, because I wanted people to realize that they weren't alone. But when I wrote about that, I had to admit, even when I wrote this book, when I first was connected to my agent, I'd actually contacted her and I said, look, I had this experience, I want to write about this, but I also want to write about this other stuff, because there's these incredible parallels between the two. But do you think anyone would be interested in reading about that stuff? And she was like, yeah. But I was genuinely like, it's just going to be, who wants to hear me like going on about my mental health? But what's been the most powerful thing is that people have messaged me and said, I thought this was going to be a survival story, but actually there's so much here that I resonated with and I wasn't expecting. And so that's, I mean, there's no greater compliment than that. If all I would want to achieve with writing a book like this is to then, for somebody to have something that they can take away that genuinely helps them, whether it's something that keeps them safe in the outdoors or something that they can use to live their life a little bit freer of whatever it is that's standing in their way.
And I, even from my own experience, I know that's true. I know it's helped me. I know from the community that I've heard from, I know it's helped them. I mean, we just have to look in the comments. Hayley's saying there about how super powerful it is. But there's that imposter syndrome. So you're never quite sure. Surely my little story is not going to.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of the impact that it's had?
Not really. It's it's a strange thing to write a book about yourself and about the experience you've had, and put it out there, and then that's it. It's out there, and I'm not really sure how people are going to take it, but people are just been wonderful. They've been messaging me, and I think through the lockdown and stuff, because the book came out in March 2020, of course, and And so I couldn't see it in shops. It was just out there in this void. And so it was just through people messaging me and making these connections. And it was wonderful. And that's been sort of the way that I know that it's reaching people. You know, I mean, that's as much as I could ever ask for.
You must have heard some powerful stories in response.
Yeah, people have shared some incredible stories of their own. And it's just, and it's been so lovely to have that connection with other people. And I think that's something I would have shied away from before. Would have been gone into classic introvert mode and, you know, gone into my shell. But no, it's been wonderful. And everyone has a story, you know.
Absolutely. And Stephen asked whether you'd be, I don't know whether he was actually asking a question, but he asked whether you'd be open to talking of survivors of other serious outdoor accidents with a view to helping them cope afterwards with the issues they face.
I mean, I'm always interested to talk to other people who've been through stuff like this, and I haven't really spoken to too many people who have. But I don't know how much I could help them cope. Maybe they could help me cope as well. Sort of, you know, it's I think because it's a process of, you know, it's still only been, it was 3 years last month since the accident, so it's not really been that long. And of course, it's been a funny 3 years where it's sort of, I was a year of recovery, a year in Vancouver by myself writing a book, and then a year predominantly in a lockdown. So, so it's not a normal 3 years. And but I mean, that's something I've been curious about, is having conversations with people who've been through similar things. Because I mean, there's loads of people who've had their, you know, even if they haven't had an accident or near-death experience, well, I'm sure people have been going into nature and being enlightened throughout time. You know, I'm fascinated by that.
Stephen, if that was a serious question, that sounded like a bit of a yes from Claire. If I can help, I might have the odd book kicking around that people who've had accidents might benefit from reading. Get in touch, and I'm sure I can help, and I'm sure Claire can help a little bit as well.
Yeah, that was a yes, a roundabout yes.
So yeah, when we spoke the other week, actually, it was you were just back from you have a little remembrance thing that you do every year on the anniversary. How's that then? How's that feel?
Yeah, every year it's the 25th of May is my rescueversary. And so the tradition is that every year I go and do a hike somewhere. And, you know, the last two have been in a lockdown, so it's been a little bit hard. But as long as I get out for, you know, a decent, at least a half-day hike somewhere where it's not where I normally go tramping around. Yeah, it's something I want to continue forever. It's just a really sort of nice way to kind of pay tribute to that moment and reflect as well. Plus, it's always good to have an excuse to go for a hike.
Hey, I founded a whole business on the basis of don't tell the missus. She's rumbled me. She has rumbled me. Cleverly. So there was a question. Who was it who asked whether it still haunts you? Now I think it's a tricky one. It says it was, hang on, who was it? It was Dawn, and she said, does it still haunt you? Does it appear in your dreams? And have you revisited the place where it happened?
Ooh, a very good question. It doesn't haunt me. I haven't had any, what I think people would describe as PTSD. The only times I have any kind of real flashbacks, and this is very specific, but it's if there is a helicopter and it's circling overhead for a prolonged period of time, like it's not just passing over, I get flashbacks to the rescue. The first time it happened was after the recovery. My friend and I did a road trip to the Grand Canyon, and they're doing the tours that went over the canyon. And so that's the first time that happened. And I had to just sort of, I felt like I was just in a weird, like I'd been removed from reality for a little bit, so I had to go and sit down. And it still happens here, you know, get the helicopters that go over North London. And if they hover around too much, it's like I feel really funny. So, you know, it's odd, but it's also, I'm thankful that it's that, because it was a pleasant memory. it's just that it's very real and very visceral, and I can really feel it. And so no, I haven't had any other sort of negative. I don't wake up with it, dreams in the middle of the night. But who knows? I mean, maybe one day it'll show up. I don't know. I mean, I think maybe writing about and talking about helps. So I'm grateful for that. And then have I gone back? I haven't gone back to the exact spot where it happened, and there's a part of me that wants to. The part of me that doesn't want to is just really because, well, one, because I think maybe that's a bit, maybe it's dangerous if I try and go back, because I've got to go a mile off the trail. But also maybe it's
let's face it, everyone would know where you were though.
Well, that's true. Yeah, and I don't think anyone will let me go by myself. And I don't know if I want to take a troop of people there. So I don't know. I'm sure it will happen, because it's this part of me that's very curious, and that place is always going to be in my mind.
And Celia asked whether you'd recovered physically.
I have. I mean, I say that I still have a lot of pain, but it's like, I'm fine, because obviously it could have been so much worse. It doesn't stop me doing anything. I have pain in my hip and my ankle. I had an MRI a couple of months ago. I've got arthritis, to be expected. And so it's just something that I have to manage, but it doesn't stop me doing anything. I went for a 12-mile walk yesterday with my mate Rich, and got home and then had to sort of ice the foot and elevate it. But like big whoop. It's like I'm just grateful that that's the worst. And in a way, it's almost nice to have that reminder. It's like that my body's amazing, and I'm so much nicer to it now than I used to be. And so I sort of don't begrudge those little pains that keep hanging around.
So I'm going to end with David's question, and it was whether you think that it had whether the fall had an overall positive effect on your life.
Absolutely. And it's somebody asked me recently. They said, if you could go back and stop yourself from walking that path, would you do it? I mean, which is a really hard thing to answer. I would never want to go through that again. I wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but having come out the other side of it, then yeah, it was in that respect, I'm glad it happened, because I went looking for some sort of clarity, and I went looking to get some questions answered, and I went looking to figure some stuff out. And I thought maybe that a couple of years in Canada would start to get the ball rolling on that. But this, this is really just, I say it's like it's fast tracked it really. It's just, it's hurled that ball off a cliff. And that I've come back now into life, and it's just, I'd never imagined I'd come back having all that sort of stuff cleared up. And of course it doesn't mean, like I said, it's not like I'm changed, but I mean, I'm so grateful for all of it to have happened.
Well, judging by the response from the community, I think we're all grateful, not obviously that you had the experience, but that you wrote the book. Because it's bloody good.
Thank you so much. I mean, wow. You guys are such a lovely bunch. Oh my God, I don't even know what to say. I really appreciate the support for the book and everyone's response to it. I mean, I can't even tell you. And, last week, just went through a bout of being in one of my sort of grey moods, and, because these things, like I say, they don't go away. And people's responses just can be so, empowering and lift you up. So I mean, that's really comes down to that, connecting with people, right? And I don't think I would have done that before, or opened myself up to doing that before. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Tim.
Well, like you said when we spoke, Claire, it really all comes down to fear and connection, and I think that's kind of what life is about, and your book is about life. So. Amazing stuff. Claire, you're an absolute legend. Thank you so much. Please don't write another book. Don't have any more incidents. That's it. Just go home, wrap yourself in cotton wool. Don't do any more. Right. We're going to end there.
Fiction next time. Some fiction.
Before there's any more outbursts of emotion. folk, if you want to do the old giving everyone a wave, I'm gonna take me and Claire off pin, and then we can do the old gallery view thing, and we can all say thank you very much, because I think that was amazing. Thank you so much, Claire. Right, sorry for overrunning. It was worth it, wasn't it?
Thanks for staying with us.
Nice to see so many people. I really appreciate it. I know nobody wants to get back on Zoom anymore, but it was worth it, wasn't it? What a fab story, a fab evening, and I think, you know, it's nice as a community to be able to give the author something back. It's really lovely to hear from Claire. So all good things. Absolutely fabulous. Thank you all so much. Claire, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I will see you all again in about a month's time.
On your Tim. Thank you.
See you all later. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.